Hello everyone, and welcome back to another modded build video. Since Halloween is here, as well as my favorite season, I thought I'd make a witchy autumn mansion. This is probably my largest build yet, so I will be splitting the exterior and the interior into two separate videos to make things easier for myself. So this video is going to be a long one. So strap yourself in, get a nice drink and a snack, and get cozy. All the mods I'm using will be linked in the description as well as the shaders. Like most of my builds, I started with laying out the base to get a visual of how big it will be, which is super handy with this one specifically because I'm going to be doing a lot of terraforming. My idea of this mansion is that it will be sitting on top of two tiers of grass outlined by a mossy cobble wall, which will act as a fence around the property, encapsulating everything. This was quite a task for me because I'm not that great at terraforming, but I really wanted to push myself out of my comfort zone for the sake of the image I had of this build in my mind. And oh boy, did it take me a long time to get the mossy walls right. I had no clue what shape I was going for here, but I knew it had to have enough space for the trees and the greenery that I'm going to be adding later. It took so much adjusting and flying around to get a gist of what I was doing. I won't show you guys everything just because it gets repetitive like really quickly, but just know that most of the build was just this. So yeah. After that, I added the sidewalk and put some slabs on top of the mossy cobble wall, as well as some extra flourishes. Then I jumped right into building the mansion. I imagined there's a witch living here in the middle of the woods, but I didn't want to make a stereotypical spooky / haunted mansion, so I gave it more lighter colors on the exterior. I mainly used the Tudor blocks from the Miniaturia mod, and my favorite part of this build is definitely the entrance. I love houses that have a cute little entrance like this one. It's so cozy, and I used so many blocks to give it the carved wood look, and I'm pretty impressed with myself, honestly. I'm really happy with how it turned out. Also added some stained glass around the doorway because I feel like this is the type of house that would have little details like that. I added this bump out window using the Miniaturia hammer tool, which adds a little bit more dimension to the face of this build. I find that what I struggle with the most when doing larger builds like this is where to add dimension and where to leave resting points. Not only do I have to keep things like that in mind for the exterior visually, but also to keep things realistic and sensible for the inside of the build. So although I did so much planning for this mansion, which did help me in the long run since I always plan my builds to make the filming portion easier, I did end up making a few changes here and there to make the build more appealing. Some changes being minimal, while others changed the build entirely. Like I mentioned, I struggle with dimension the most, so you'll see me tweaking the shape of the build a lot throughout this whole video. After filling in the rest of the walls and adding a bump out to the second floor, I started on working on one of my two greenhouses. That's right, there are two greenhouses. I imagine that this witch needs to grow plenty of plants for her potions and spells and whatever she gets up to, so I made sure that she had plenty of room to do so. And at this point, I was kind of just jumping around, filling in whatever I could, because I was trying to avoid working on the back wall right next to the greenhouse that I was working on, because I genuinely had no clue what I was going to put there. I didn't know if the staircase that was going to be right in front of it was going to block any view of where a window could be, or if I was going to absolutely ruin my plans by changing it. So I just put it off. I filled every single other possible spot on the house, and I just left that wall completely blank. And I'm pretty glad I did, because in the end it was worth it. I added an additional thing you'll see later that kind of ties the whole greenhouse thing together. But other than that, I basically just filled in the walls and the windows as much as I had to until I got to the roof. All right, now it's time to do the roof, and man, I hate doing roofs. Seriously, usually it's because it's just boring and repetitive, but this one was just, it was so confusing. I tried to make it easier for myself by just starting on doing the shape of the front of each bump out, if that makes sense, just to kind of get a gist of where each bit is gonna start and how I can connect them. But filling it in, oh my god, that was so much work. it killed me. It killed me. Now, just like most of the build, I changed a lot about the roof as I went, and I really tried my best not to go insane in the process. There was a lot of real estate to cover here, and I used the Miniaturia Fantasy roofing for all of it. I went with this lovely green color. I actually was originally going to use more of like a yellowy orange color of the same block, but since I will be adding some trees around the mansion of the same colors, I ended up going with the green just to make the trees pop a bit more, and I think that was a great choice. After adding a shingle-like block, I think, to the upper half of the walls, I moved on to the second greenhouse. And after kind of experimenting and trying to do something, I ended up deciding that I hated it and it looks awful. So I pivoted, I took it down, and I had the idea to make it into a bump out. The wall on that side was also just way too flat and looked really plain, so I made the bump out 2 levels and added another big peaked roof for more dimension. I leaned into the black detailing I've been adding to the corners of this build, and it started to remind me of a mansion that I had actually toured in real life. It had a very similar room to this, but it was green and absolutely beautiful. I'm the type of person who dreams of having a house with huge windows so I can get as much sunlight as possible, and that's immediately what I thought of when I saw this. On top of this greenhouse, which I guess is more of a sunroom now, I added a room that was very similar to the first floor, keeping the big giant windows, and I also added more of that wood detailing to kind of tie it in with the front entrance. And after that little break, we get to go back to the lovely roofing and actually finish it this time, because I have been trying to find any possible little thing to do to put it off. Now, as I was building this roof, I couldn't help but have this voice in the back of my mind telling me that it was too much roof. And by too much roof, I mean a giant mass of green on top of this house was a little bit much, honestly. So after doing a big chunk of the front half, I took a step back and I looked at it, and I was completely correct. So to counter this big massive green, I added a tower right in the middle. So while I'm working on this tower, let's talk more about the witch that lives here and kind of get to know her more. I kind of see her as a good / neutral witch, and I imagine that she prefers being alone and takes solace in her isolation in these woods. She doesn't talk to other witches that much, and she just likes to keep to herself and spends most of her days working on perfecting her craft, which obviously was potions and magic. She's still studying and is learning ways to improve her magic, so maybe she's like a young witch. I have no clue about how a young witch was able to get such a massive mansion to live in, but maybe it was passed down to her from previous generations of witches, or maybe like a family member that's a witch, something like that. She probably makes money off of her potions that are made for like medicinal cures, or maybe to reverse bad spells. That would be interesting. Maybe there's like a little witch market where a bunch of witches sell like varieties of potions and things along those lines, maybe some good or bad. Or maybe the bad potions are for the black market, the black magic market. Now I want to see what like an evil witch's mansion would look like. Maybe I should do that sometime. That'd be really cool, especially in contrast to this one. That makes me think as well, like what kind of magic would I do if I was a witch? Like I definitely would want to do helpful things like cures and stuff along those lines, but like what if I wanted to make inanimate objects come to life? Or like what if I wanted to bring back the dead? I think that'd be pretty cool. I could bring my stuffed animals to life and be friends with them all. That's what I'd prioritize if I could do magic. But like, what would you do if you were a witch or a wizard? We don't discriminate here. I made another change of plans here, and I added another addition to this side of the house, and it is a lot bigger than the other ones that I've done. It's basically the whole span of this side of the house, just because I feel like the roof needed to kind of poke out a bit more, because it was almost like flesh with the little bit that pokes out the front, and I just felt like that looked a bit awkward. So I just added more shape here, and I did more roofing. So fun. And after that, I basically was just filling in the roof. There was a lot to get done in the back, and I ended up having the same exact issue as I did with the front of the house, where it's just a big blob of green. Oh my god, what a surprise. So I wanted to add another peak at the back of this house, and I ended up just mirroring the other little bump out, I just keep saying, so we're just gonna go with it, the other bump out on this back side of the building. So now this side's a bit more symmetrical. I think it looks cute, and it also kind of works out for when I do the inside of the build, which you'll see in part 2. And again, we're filling in the roof. This is like, you know, like at some point you just black out and then the roof's done. And then you're happy again. I'm making it sound like it's the worst thing in the world, but I do this every time I build a house. It's fine. Here's the back that I am changing. I use for the smaller windows, I use this kind of like, what'd you call this, like crisscross window that I just thought looked a bit nice, and I liked having a bit more variety because the sheer amount of windows I feel like was needed to have more variety. Another thing that I did quite a few of is I added circular windows, and I freaking love these windows so much. They are so pretty. I added some orange stained glass to kind of, you know, get the autumn colors back in with the green, and oh, it's so pretty. Green and orange are so good together, which I know is very like pumpkin Halloween, but like it's so cute. I'll never get over it. I love it. Added another bump out on this side. Can you count how many times I said bump out in this video? It's kind of crazy. This, I think, this angle of the house, I've shown it in the preview, like it's, oh my god, it's just so pretty with the trees next to it. I love it so much, and I would sit by this window all day and I would work. Like, oh, that'd make me so happy if I had a window like that to work by. Oh, love it. After finishing that half of the house, I added 2 more beautiful, lovely circle windows to the back, 2 peaks, and then we finally get to move on to working on the trees. Now, just like terraforming, I am not as experienced with building trees. I wouldn't say I'm the best at building trees. I definitely wouldn't say I'm like god awful at them, but I'd say I'm a good neutral, maybe. But something that really helped me was these 2 mods, both of them actually, Miniaturia and Cocricot, have these pieces of wood that kind of work as branches. I know there are some at an angle, and then there's some that go straight up like the ones I'm using on this birch tree. And having that variety in shape and size is so nice, because usually I would just use like a fence post, but this having the same texture as the tree just made it a lot more realistic. And oh my god, I love it. It's so nice. And obviously for the birch tree, I'm going to be choosing yellow leaves because I absolutely love the yellow birch trees in autumn. They might be my favorite autumn tree. I have this every year where like I have like a favorite color of leaves, but like they're all so pretty when they're together that like it would feel like a betrayal to only build one leaf color of tree during the autumn. So we will be adding a variety. But for the birch tree, what really helped was looking up a reference, because they're kind of a lot skinnier than normal trees, and they kind of have a lot of branches that just go out in random directions from the base of the tree. Whereas like, you know, like an oak tree, kind of near the top more, you see more branches, and it's, you know, a lot more leafy up there. Whereas this is kind of like, she's all over the place. I love her for it, but like, that made it a little bit more difficult for me because I was like, oh, I'm not great at building a tree, so let's build a tree I've never built before, you know. After finishing that first birch tree, I went ahead and added another one with the same leaf color, you know, kind of had the idea of it down. So this one turned out, I think, a little bit better. I actually went back and changed the yellow leaves to this one with like a smaller leaf pattern, kind of, because it reminds me a lot more of like real life birch trees. And I think that was a good decision because Some about these ones, it just felt a little bit too bulky, especially because the tree itself is just so tiny. Next, I added some foliage kind of scattered around the two trees, just giving some more variety of color to the leaves. And after that, I jumped in and I got to work on the biggest tree in this build. This oak tree is the star of the show. She is the belle of the ball, and my aim was to make it as tall or taller than the house so that it would pop against the roof. So I used a lot of oak wood, and since I was using oak wood, I made use of the slabs as well to give the shape more variety. The birch trees were more about getting the wispy, skinny shape, whereas this tree is more bulky and fuller, so I use lots and lots of red leaves. I love the color variation in these leaves. It's so pretty. And my trick was to basically go around the tree and meet the leaf bunches when they intersected. But I also had to keep in mind not to make it too round or perfect because I am not going for an Animal Crossing tree. That we don't want that. I felt like the base of the tree was looking a bit too bare, so I added a few more branches with a lot of more leaves because I just want as many leaves as possible. This is autumn. This is like the best part of this season. Still making use of those modded branches. Since this tree is bigger, I used them to taper the branches and make the leafy areas less bulky. With the Cocricot mod, there's a lot of blocks that make use of connected textures, these leaves being one of them. So as I add to this tree, you can see the blocks connect and change the shape to have less sharp edges, which I find to be really helpful. It adds a more organic shape to the trees, which is exactly what I want. But sometimes it can feel as though it's not filling the empty spaces enough, especially with a large tree like this. So I sometimes had to overcompensate that by adding more leaves than I would a vanilla Minecraft tree. I found some orange and red ivy that works perfect with this tree, so I absolutely covered the tree in it. I love adding any type of vine or moss element in my builds, so I also covered the mansion with the same ivy to give it more wear and tear and character. I imagine this building to be really old, probably having been passed down from generations of witches, so I have a feeling that this age is starting to show through the moss and the cobblestone, the piles of leaves on the roof, and, you know, just all that kind of stuff. Although I'm pretty sure the witch could just use magic to fix that, but I'm gonna make an exception just for the aesthetics. I also think that it really just brings more of the autumn vibe to the house from the trees and really ties everything together. Now that I'm done with the trees on this side of the build, I'm going to just start scattering leaves here and there to give the effect of leaves falling from the trees. I feel like it wouldn't be an autumn build if it didn't have a crisp pile of leaves to jump into, so I also added that. Once that's done, I'm going to head on over to the entrance and start building the wall separating the garden area. I want to keep this area partially hidden so it feels private because that's what I would want if I had a nice place like this. But having just a stone wall wasn't enough privacy, so I put an iron fence around just the front half of the garden. I put plenty of plants to keep with the overgrown vibes. I honestly couldn't make up my mind on how I wanted the cobble wall to look. I wanted more detailed stonework on the top of the wall, but I ended up just going with more iron fencing. Sometimes the best answer is the simplest. This build has so much stone, so I opted for a smaller, more worn pathway into the garden. It kind of reminds me of the desire paths that are made when many people over time use the same path or shortcut, wearing down the grass till an organic pathway emerges. I made the decision on the spot to add these trees in front of the iron fence to layer more and kind of add more landscaping to the property. I love these trees and how they turned out. I feel like they just give just enough privacy to that area whilst still leaving enough space to get a little peek at the garden that will soon be there. And now it's time to start the garden. I had a hard time figuring out the layout, so you'll see random blocks showing up here and there. Those were just to mark where key points are going to be built. I knew I wanted a fountain, so I made use of a lot of the modded stone blocks, and honestly, having access to all of these made building the fountain a lot easier than it would be in vanilla Minecraft. I love the stone pillar I used for the middle of the fountain, and the decorative block on top of the pillar looks like it was meant to be used for this. I made use of almost every single mossy block I could find for the bottom of the fountain. Since this witch is a little messy, I don't think she'd be cleaning the fountain anytime soon. But honestly, I think the mossier the better. I wish I had the moss block in this version, but alas. I bet the fountain attracts plenty of frogs and toads too. That'd be perfect for her potions. I doubt she'd be tossing frogs into her cauldron. She probably just uses their sweat or something more humane. Do frogs sweat? Ew. I finished the fountain with some lily pads, added some benches, and started on connecting the pathways and adding flora. Part of my building process involves using lots of images for reference and inspiration. For the garden area, most of my inspiration was taken from the movie Coraline. I love the scene where she's in the other world and you get this top-down view of the massive garden that's all lit up and looks like a portrait of her face. I loved all the messy cobblestone pathways and how the layout was more twisty and turny than neat and put together. Another inspiration of mine is the courtyard and garden area from the first Resident Evil remake. I had finished that game last year and I loved the mansion so much that when I started planning this build, it immediately came to mind. And although I'm not going for anything spooky in this build, I do love the entrance with the staircase that splits in half, the glossy marble floor, and the overall vibe. Maybe you'll see that when we get to the interior in part 2. I feel like Cocricot and Miniaturia have the perfect items to build that mansion. Maybe I should save that idea for a future video? My approach to this garden was to section off all the areas with flowers by outlining them with oak leaves. I had attempted to do this with stone brick, but I thought the leaves looked more natural and it didn't clash with the pathway. The only colors of flowers that I used were yellow, orange, red, and white to fit with the fall theme. This stone area here is going to work as a sort of balcony. I wanted a clear view of the water in the distance to give some breathing room and create a nice spot to sit. I'm sure the witch starts her mornings here with a warm cup of tea. I feel like we should have a name for our witch at this point. I feel kind of bad just calling her the witch after building her entire house. Maybe you guys could come up with a cute name for her? After adding a stone railing to the balcony, I went on to build our first of many trees in this area. I wanted something to drape over the balcony, and I had originally planned for the tree to be in the balcony area and kind of look like it was planted there, but I went with this instead, which I'm pretty happy with, as I add something else to fill that space later. At this point in the build, I'm kind of freestyling. When I was originally planning the mansion, I only got into the very basics of what I wanted the building to look like. The garden was kind of left for me to figure out in the moment. Fortunately, at this point, I'm getting a bit more confident in my tree building abilities, so it's not feeling as strenuous as it was before when I was building the larger trees. There's a block that has an animation of falling leaves that I think I used on almost every tree I built here. It adds such a lovely hint of life to the build. I have shaders, so most of the leaf blocks move in the wind, but the modded leaves don't, so this was a nice touch to add that movement back. I wanted to make the area around the fountain pretty symmetrical. Not perfect, but close, since I had already added 2 benches across from each other. I used these angel statues that are just gorgeous, and I put them on pillars and then started on my second tree for this section. At this point, my replay mod had been really messing with me, and when I'd go back and watch my footage, there would be just huge chunks missing. Like literally, like actual chunks in the game were missing, and sometimes it would just not show the blocks that I was placing, so I kind of just had to work with what I got. I added more of those falling leaves, some ivy, and then I scattered a bunch of leaves on the ground underneath the tree. I did not have a methodical approach to the flowers. I kind of just randomly placed them and then filled the empty space with the next flower and so on. The only thing I did do purposefully was have the smaller flowers in the front to make them more visible from eye level. Still going with the overgrown theme, I feel like the plants would kind of be growing crazy and all over the place. Remember the wall I had mentioned earlier that I just left blank? Here's what I ended up doing with it. Knowing this witch does a lot of gardening, I thought she'd probably need a place to store all of her gardening tools, so I built a shed. I made it pretty small and simple so it wouldn't take up too much space. I used a stair block for the roof. I believe it was called roof stairs, I think even. Then I made support beams with a normal stair block, and what I haven't mentioned yet is that I downloaded a new mod. It's the Chisel and Bits mod, and this mod allows you to build with even tinier blocks, making it possible to build custom furniture, which you may or may not see me do in part 2, or edit pre-existing blocks like I'm doing now. I added these tall hedges going around the garden that start right after the iron fence. I didn't want to use just iron fence because it felt a little too cold and I wanted this garden to feel cozy. I also put an exit right next to the shed so our witch can go sit under the massive oak tree and enjoy the leaves. If I had to choose a favorite item from these mods, I would have to say it's got to be the archway / window trim pieces. I love the extra detail it adds to every build. Now I'm just going around and adding plants to any empty space. This works especially when you're going for an overgrown look like I am. I always try to add variation so it doesn't get too repetitive though. Going back to the front of the garden, I fill in the flower areas exactly like I did previously. I added another tree, but this time I made it a tiny baby birch, which is honestly the cutest and I love it so much. After that, I move on to my next medium tree, another oak. As I was working on this tree, every time I took a step back to see how it was going, I couldn't help but feel like the stone pathways were off. So I reworked the main area a bit and replaced the stone with a fish scale style stone brick, and outlined it with stairs to define the area more. If I could go back and change anything, I think I would have went in with the Chisel and Bits mod and made a more curved outline to that area instead of using the stairs. But I was still in the learning stage with that mod and it probably would have taken ages for me to get the shape right. Now with the pathway fixed, I did the last of the garden flowers and decided to build more tall trees around the back, leaving space for the nice view of the lake. At this point, I have built so many of these trees, I could probably build them from memory. I saw more empty space that could use some baby birches, so I added 2 of them and then got to work on refining the greenhouse. I felt as though it could use more shape, so I added a bump out section and used some black slabs to outline a roof. Honestly, this immediately improved it, and now it might be my favorite feature of the house. I love the glass block I chose and how everything is visible on either side of the windows. There's still a nice design, giving it some lovely detail. Although there's a greenhouse for our witch to grow her plants in, I figured she'd make use of the area around it as well. I know it's not crop season in autumn, but maybe she uses magic to keep them growing all year round? With the greenhouse done, I added extra plants and ivy growing everywhere and moved on to the rest of the landscaping. I'm honestly so glad I pushed myself to do more than just a house for this project, because seeing all the greenery paired with the autumn trees I built makes me so happy. This is my favorite time of year, and having a build that encapsulates that is just amazing. I always love going for walks this time of year to look at the beautiful trees, and I'm also so excited for Halloween. It's definitely one of my favorite holidays. If you're dressing up this year, I would love to know what you'll be in the comments. And if you're not, tell me what your favorite costumes were from past Halloweens. I decided to add 2 birch trees for the very last trees that I'll be building. I wanted them to peek over the hedge fence and be visible when the witch is gardening. I then outlined the cobble wall with leaves and scattered an ungodly amount of flowers and grass in all of the empty spaces. For the final touches, I added a few seating areas, one on the patio and a few on the balcony, as well as a bench. I put some crates around the shed so the witch can harvest her crops when they're ready, and lastly, I put one more statue on the balcony. And that's the exterior of the witch's autumn mansion. I'm honestly so proud of this build. I apologize for how last minute the upload is. I went all out on this build and I did not take into account how much extra work that would add, but it's done. I learned a lot from this build and I'm so excited for all of you to see me decorate the interior in part 2. Again, all the mods I used are linked in the description, as well as my socials if you are interested in seeing more of what I do. I also have an Etsy shop where I sell handmade stickers of my art if that's something you're into. And yeah, part 2 will be uploaded soon. Let me know what your favorite part of this build is, as well as something you love about autumn. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a lovely and safe Halloween, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!